Hello. I just going down the Crocketville Road, and I see somebody laying out.
What road are you? What's the name of the highway that you're on?
I know it's Crocketville Road.
Just know it's Crocketville Road.
Yeah.
And is it in the road or on the side of the road?
In the road.
Oh, in the road?
Yeah.
All right. So what's your name and call that number?
My name is Ronnie Capers.
Okay. All right, Mr. Capers. Can I get a phone number for you?
I don't know the number off this phone, but you can call this number back. I'm going to work.
Okay, but this is a good number to reach you back at?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We'll get an officer headed out that way to see what's going on.
Okay. So he laid in the road. I ain't moving or nothing like that, but somebody going to hit him. It's dark. Somebody going to hit him.
All right. We'll get an officer headed out that way.
Okay.
All right, sir.
On July 8, 2015, a man was on his way to work in Hampton County, South Carolina, when he saw somebody laying in the middle of the road. When officers arrived on the scene, they found the body of 19-year-old Stephen Smith and determined that he was already dead. At the scene, officers initially believed that Stephen had been shot, but an autopsy revealed that he had actually died of blunt force trauma to the head. Stephen's car was found about 3 miles or 4.8 kilometers away. The fuel door was open and the gas cap was hanging off. It made it seem like Stephen had run out of fuel, and while walking down the street to get assistance, he was hit by a car and killed. But the evidence didn't really match that scenario. Investigators would say that the vehicle did look staged to them. Also, his wallet was inside the car. Why would he have left his wallet if he had run out of gas? And why would the gas cap be off? It's not like you can check how much fuel is in the car that way. If Stephen had been struck by a car, he would have had other injuries. He would have had injuries from where the vehicle struck his body, but the only injury the medical examiner could find was the head wound. His shoes were loose-fitting, and a vehicle impact would have knocked them off his feet. Stephen also had blood spatter on his body that didn't add up to a vehicle impact. It left many questions about what had really happened that night, and many people involved in the case would suggest that the death was intentional and not an accident. Over the course of the investigation, a very familiar name continued to come up: Murdaugh. The Murdock family was one of the most powerful and well-known families in the area, and despite the case eventually going cold, Stephen's death would only be the first in a string of deaths related to the Murdock family. A string of deaths that would end an entire dynasty. This is Monsters. On February 2, 2018, Gloria Satterfield was rushed to the hospital after taking a bad fall at her employer's hunting lodge. She had been the Murdock family housekeeper for 20 years when Maggie Murdock called 911.
What's going on out there?
My housekeeper has fallen and her head is bleeding. I cannot get her up.
Okay, you said she's fallen. She's bleeding from the head?
Yes.
How old is she?
I'm not sure, like 58 maybe.
Where'd she fall from?
She fell going up the steps, up the brick steps.
How many steps is there?
8.
Okay, is she on the ground or is she up near the top?
She's on the ground. She's on the ground.
Is she conscious?
No, not really.
Is she awake at all?
Yes.
Okay. Is she just not, like, responding appropriately, but she is awake?
Man, she's not responding.
Okay, I've already got them on the way, and me asking questions does not slow them down, ma'am. Knowing if she's conscious is one of the things that the medic needs to know if she's responding at all to you.
No.
Okay, so she's not responsive at all.
Well, I mean, she's mumbling.
Okay, so she is somewhat conscious. Is she breathing okay?
Yes.
Is she bleeding from anywhere?
Yes, her head.
Okay, are you guys able to control the bleeding?
No.
Can you put a clean rag or anything on it?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, is she bleeding from, like, her face, the back of the head?
I've got an ambulance coming. Sir, ma'am, what?
Where exactly is she bleeding from on her head?
I'm not sure. At the top of her head.
Okay. What happened?
She just fell back down. Can I get off this phone so I can go down there?
Can I have your name and phone number? Are you able to bring the phone down by her?
What?
Are you on a cell phone where you can walk down there and talk?
I'm on a cell phone. No.
Okay, can you bring it with you so we can ask her some questions about what kind of pain she's having?
Maggie seemed annoyed and distracted during the call. At one point, she said that Gloria fell again, and despite being on a cell phone, she wanted to end the call with 911 in order to go check on her. When the operator insisted she stay on the phone, Maggie handed the phone over to her son, Paul.
Hello?
Yeah, can you ask the patient what kind of pain she's having?
Ma'am, she can't talk.
Okay, do you know...
She's cracked her head and there's blood on the concrete and she's bleeding out of her left ear.
Okay, she's bleeding out of her ear?
And out of her head. She's cracked her skull.
Okay. All right, the other lady said that she had tried to stand up and fell down again?
No, I was holding her up. And
okay.
She told me to turn her loose and she was trying to use her arm, but then she fell back over.
Okay, do you guys know who she is?
Yes, she works for us.
Okay, do you know if she's ever had a stroke or anything before?
Ma'am, can you stop asking her these questions?
I already have them on the way. Me asking questions does not slow them down in any way. These are relevant questions that I have to ask for the ambulance. One of my questions is, has she ever had a stroke?
I don't believe she's ever had a stroke now that I know that.
Okay, is she able to talk to you guys at all, or is she unconscious now?
She's not unconscious, she's just mumbling.
Okay.
I believe she's maybe hit her head and maybe has a concussion or something.
Okay.
Maybe.
Do you know what her name is?
Gloria Satterfield.
At the hospital, Gloria was lucid enough to give her name and say she didn't know what caused the fall. She had a subdural hematoma and several broken ribs. She had surgery to repair the ribs and part of her chest wall, but while she was in recovery, she suffered a brain bleed and she was near comatose for 3 weeks. Gloria died on February 26th. The Murdaughs told police that Gloria had been tripped by one of their dogs and fell down the brick stairs in front of their house, but most people didn't believe that. Alec Murdock claimed that he arrived at the hunting lodge just after the accident and that Gloria told him that the dogs had tripped her. But first, she wasn't able to communicate on the scene. It was likely that she wasn't able to speak until she was stabilized at the hospital. Second, Alex's claim didn't match what Gloria had said at the hospital, and third, the handyman that was employed by the Murdaughs was also there and said that Alec had never spoken to Gloria after the incident. Soon, the rumor mill started to say that Maggie had pushed Gloria down the stairs. Then they said it was Paul. There were rumors that Gloria knew about Alec's drug habit, so she was killed to keep her quiet. There were also rumors that Gloria had been stern with Paul and he snapped and pushed her. Despite the wild speculation, no charges were ever filed. On February 23, 2019, 19-year-old Mallory Beach and 5 friends, her boyfriend Anthony Cook, plus Connor Cook, Morgan Dowdy, Miley Altman, and Paul Murdaugh got on a boat on the Beaufort River and headed to an oyster roast. The boat belonged to Paul's family, and he was adamant that he would be the driver. Paul had stopped on the way to the boat and used his older brother's ID to purchase beer and White Claws. It's alleged that the group decided to take the boat to the party instead of driving because they heard there were drunk driving checkpoints on the road that evening. They spent 5 hours at the gathering, drinking all of the alcohol they had brought with them, plus additional drinks that were at the party. When they were ready to leave, numerous people asked them not to drive the boat drunk, but Paul wouldn't listen. Early the next morning, the group were returning when they stopped at a dockside bar where Paul and another underage passenger each drank 2 shots. Paul, who was known as an angry drunk, almost got into a fight with another patron before throwing a chair and leaving. Despite friends asking him to let someone else drive, he insisted he knew what he was doing. While on the boat, Paul was either driving erratically or leaving the wheel to go argue with his girlfriend, Morgan Dowdy. The surviving passengers said that a belligerent Paul yelled at her, spit on her, and then slapped her in the face. The fight wasn't about anything specific. It was just Paul being confrontational because he wasn't able to handle his liquor. But after Mallory yelled at him to stop, he stomped back over to the wheel and pushed the throttle. The boat took off and crashed. At 2:17 a.m., Paul crashed the boat into the Archers Creek Bridge, throwing the passengers into the river. When emergency responders arrived at the scene, 5 of the young adults had made it to the shore, but Mallory was nowhere to be found. Despite an extensive search of the water, rescuers couldn't find the young woman. 8 days later, 2 boaters spotted her body about 5 miles down the river. The autopsy determined that she had suffered blunt force trauma and drowned. Paul's blood alcohol level was 0.24, 3 times the legal limit. Now that wasn't discovered right away because Paul was never given a breathalyzer at the scene. Fortunately, he had had blood taken at the hospital, so authorities were able to document that he was intoxicated at the time of the crash. That blood was taken several hours after the crash, so he would have been even more intoxicated at the time of the accident. Paul was reported to be belligerent at the hospital, and while the victims were being treated, Paul's father Alec Murdock and his grandfather Randolph Murdock showed up and told police that Connor was the person driving the boat. How they could have possibly known that was unclear, and it didn't match the stories of the other passengers on the boat that morning. The Murdocks were immediately trying to take over the investigation's narrative to absolve Paul of being responsible for the fatal boat crash. Despite Paul obviously being the driver during the accident, he wasn't charged with a crime until 2 months later. Many people believe that it was due to the interference from his family, and that wouldn't be the first time that Paul would get away with crashing a vehicle while under the influence. In 2017, Paul and Morgan were driving home from a Christmas party. Morgan was driving because Paul was heavily intoxicated, but he told her to pull over because he wanted to drive. After they switched, he ended up losing control of the pickup truck going around a turn and crashed. The truck was on its side, and Morgan said that Paul kept a number of guns in his vehicle, so they had spilled out all over the side of the road. Along with that, there were empty beer cans that were also in the vehicle. Morgan pulled out her phone and dialed 911, but Paul grabbed it out of her hand, ended the call, and threw the device. He ended up calling his family, who showed up and cleared out the mess. They removed the guns and the beer cans before the police arrived at the scene. Not only that, but they berated Morgan for attempting to call the police in the first place. The Murdock family had risen to a place where they believed they were above the law and that nobody could say no to them. Unfortunately for them, that level of corruption would only tear the family apart. The Murdock family had run the largest law firm in Hampton County, South Carolina for generations. Randolph Murdock Sr. graduated from law school and established a law practice in Hampton County in 1910. In 1920, Randolph became the county attorney, and that position would be filled by a Murdock for the next 86 years. Richard Alexander Murdock was born on May 27, 1968 to Randolph III and Elizabeth. Randolph was the acting county attorney at the time while also working for his own law firm. Richard, who went by Alec, spelled like Alex, grew up under the umbrella of the Murdock name. He and his father and his 2 brothers spent their time hunting and fishing. The Murdock boys were raised with an overwhelming sense of entitlement. They were all allowed to drink from a young age, and everyone in the Murdock family seemed to suffer from alcoholism. Since his parents were generous donors to the school board, Alec would never get in trouble despite being described as a bully. Alec followed in the family business, starting out attending the University of South Carolina. That's where he met his future wife, Maggie. Margaret Branstetter was born on September 15, 1968 in Nashville, Tennessee to Terry and Kennedy Branstetter. Maggie's father worked for DuPont and he was transferred around a bit before they settled in Cooper River, South Carolina, and Maggie began attending USC. Both Alec and Maggie graduated from the university with bachelor's degrees, and Alec went on to attend the University of South Carolina School of Law. During his time there, his identity as an entitled elitist would show itself. Once, after getting drunk at a party, he and some friends went to a strip club and attempted to continue drinking. When the bartender refused to serve the already drunk and rowdy law students, Alec instigated a fight with the bouncers. When sheriff's deputies arrived, they arrested the intoxicated men, but once Alex mentioned that his father was the county attorney, he was personally escorted home by an officer, and eventually all charges against him were dropped. Alec and Maggie were married on August 14, 1993 in Charleston. A year later, Alec graduated from law school and would eventually begin working for the family law business. Richard Alexander Murdaugh Jr. was born on April 11, 1996, but instead of going by Alec like his father, he was always known as Buster. Over the years, Alec's prominence in the community increased. He was elected chairman of the Hampton County Democratic Party. He got a position on the Arnold Fields Community Endowment. And of course, he was working for the largest law firm in the area. Paul Murdaugh was born on April 14, 1999. It was soon after Paul joined the family that Alec hired Gloria Satterfield to be their housekeeper, but she also helped raise their 2 sons. People close to the family said that they felt like Maggie never really bonded with Paul as she suffered from postpartum depression, and Gloria ended up doing much of the childcare early in Paul's life. Despite that, the family continued to be viewed in high regard as one of the most powerful in the area. That was until death started to be connected to the family. But it wasn't only death that had been plaguing the Murdaugh family. Alec Murdock had become addicted to OxyContin and eventually needed more and more money to feed his habit. In an effort to bring in more money, in 2005, Alec began a campaign of fraud in order to line his bank account. He started filing insurance settlements on behalf of victims and their families, but never giving the settlement to those people. The first known victims were 2 minor sisters whose mother and brother had died in a car accident. The Plyler family was driving on the highway when a tire blew, causing an accident that killed 37-year-old Angela and 14-year-old Justin. 12-year-old Alanya and 8-year-old Hannah were both seriously injured. Alec filed a wrongful death suit against Bridgestone, Firestone, and the Ford Motor Company. The girls were awarded a settlement in the millions, and though they did receive some of the money, they believed they needed to ask Alec and his partner Russell Lafitte any time they needed any. So the lawyers controlled the money, and over the years they stole millions of dollars from the 2 victims. In 2009, Alec represented a young man who had been paralyzed in another car accident. 21-year-old Hakeem Pinkney was in a car driven by his mother when a tire blew out and resulted in a crash. While Hakeem was in the hospital fighting for his life, Alex filed a lawsuit against the Michelin Tire Company and won over $600,000. Nobody in the Pinkney family was notified about the judgment, and a few days later, Hakeem's ventilator was somehow unplugged. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late and Hakeem had died. None of the money awarded in the suit was ever given to the victims. Alec continued embezzling over the years, stealing millions of dollars from the victims he was supposed to be helping. Some people said that he spent the money on drugs, but it's hard to believe he bought that many drugs. It's known that he also took lavish vacations, went on many hunting trips in exotic locations, and always took a private jet when he traveled. Eventually, Alec's theft of his clients hit closer to home. After Gloria Satterfield's death, Alec offered to file a lawsuit against his homeowner's insurance on her family's behalf. Alec told Gloria's sons that he felt terrible about the supposed accident and claimed that he wanted to take care of them. They had no reason not to trust him. Gloria had worked for the Murdaughs for nearly 20 years and they thought of them as family. Alec would go on to receive $4.3 million in settlements from his own insurance company, none of which were given to Gloria's family. And conveniently enough, he had only started that policy a month before the accident. On June 7, 2021, Alec called 911 to report he found Maggie and Paul shot dead in the kennels of their hunting lodge.
This is Alec Murdock at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police and the ambulance immediately. My wife and child just shot badly.
Okay, and are they breathing?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and you said it's your wife and your son?
My wife and my son.
Are they in a vehicle?
No, ma'am. They're on the ground out at my kennels.
Do you see anyone in the area?
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
What color is your house on the outside? What color is your house on the outside?
It's white. You can't see it from the road.
Okay, is it a house or a mobile home?
It's a house.
Okay, and what is your name?
My name is Alec Murdock.
Okay, and did you hear anything, or did you come home and find them?
No, man, I've been gone. I just came back.
Okay, and was anyone else supposed to be at your house?
No, ma'am. Please hurry.
We're getting somebody out there to you. Okay, what is her name?
Maggie and Paul.
Maggie is her name?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And please hurry.
We're getting somebody out there to you. Me asking you these questions don't slow them down, okay? Is he moving at all, your son? I know you said that she was shot, but what about your son?
Nobody's. They're not. Neither one of them's moving.
And does anything look out of place?
Ma'am, not particularly, really. No, ma'am.
Okay.
Are they close, ma'am?
Yeah, they've been en route with you ever since you've got on the phone with me. I have multiple people coming out there to you.
Alec told investigators that he had arrived at the hunting lodge in Islandton at 10:05 and immediately felt like something was wrong. He found his wife Maggie and younger son Paul shot to death near the dog kennels. He said he had immediately called 911. During the 911 call, he went out of his way to inform the operator that he had been gone and had just gotten back to the property. He told investigators that he had given his father a ride to the hospital that evening. Then he went back to the lodge and took a nap. When he woke up, he didn't see Maggie or Paul at the house, so he went to visit his mother who had dementia. When he arrived back at the lodge, he found his wife and son murdered.
Female victim, male caller.
And then the other guy, though, he hasn't came inside the tape yet.
Then don't have to worry about him.
The medical examiner determined that Maggie had died from gunshot wounds fired from a rifle and Paul had died from gunshot wounds from a shotgun. He placed their time of death at around 9 p.m. Again, Alex claimed to have been gone at that time. During a search of the crime scene, investigators found Paul's cell phone, which had a video time-stamped 8:44 p.m. In the video, you could see dogs in the kennel and in the background you could hear voices. The voices were of Alec and Maggie engaged in an argument. That meant that Alec was actually at the property around the time of the shooting. Investigators found shell casings at the scene matching a rifle and a shotgun, but those weapons were never found despite a large number of firearms being recovered from the property. But all of those details wouldn't be immediately released. There was talk that Alec was a person of interest and he hired a lawyer, but authorities didn't name any suspects and assured the public that they were safe. During the investigation, Buster, as well as a number of people close to Alec, were allowed on the property unsupervised while it was still an active crime scene. Alec outright stated that he thought the shooting might have been in retaliation to Mallory Beach's death. It was one of the first things he told officers on the scene. The Murdaughs claimed that Paul had received anonymous threats. Mallory's boyfriend, Anthony Cook, was interviewed as a possible suspect, but that avenue didn't go anywhere. Based on the information investigators were finding, authorities reopened the cases of Stephen Smith and Gloria Satterfield. They even exhumed Gloria's body. While that was happening, law enforcement had reviewed the Snapchat video where Alec could be heard in the background. After interviewing multiple people close to the family and having most of them confirm it was in fact Alec's voice, they brought him into the station for another interview.
And Maggie was heard in the background. And you were heard in the background. And that was prior to 9 p.m.
I heard Rogan Gibson ask me if I was up there. He said he thought it was me.
Was it you?
At 9 o'clock?
Yes, sir.
No, sir. Not if my times are right.
Who do you think it could have been?
I have no idea.
And Rogan's been around your family for pretty much all of his life.
Oh, absolutely.
And he recognizes your voice, and you have a distinct voice. Do you think of anybody else that has a voice similar to yours that he may have misinterpreted?
No, sir.
The detective brought up the Snapchat video and asked if it was his voice in the background. Alec claimed that it wasn't him, even though the voice sounded just like him. Alec couldn't explain who the voice might have been. Not long after that, another lawyer at Alec's law firm saw a check on his desk made out to him instead of the law firm. He reported it to his supervisors, and they looked into every settlement case Alec had worked on and found years' worth of fraud. When they called him in to question him about their findings, he admitted to the thefts. He told his superiors that he had stolen millions of dollars worth of money from his clients. The company demanded his resignation and then notified the authorities of the crimes. The Murdaughs had been a powerful name in South Carolina, having been built up over generations. In just 3 months, Alec had managed to tear the dynasty to the ground. 2 days later, Alec made another frantic 911 call, but this time it was him who was the victim.
Hampton County 911, what's your emergency? On Salkehatchie Road.
Okay, what's the address on Salkehatchie Road?
I'm by the church.
What's going on?
I got a flat tire,
Mm-hmm.
and I stopped, and somebody stopped to help me, and when I turned my back, they tried to shoot me.
Oh, okay. Were you shot?
Yes, but
Okay.
I mean, I'm okay.
You shot where? Where were you shot at?
Huh?
Did they actually shoot you or they tried to shoot you?
They shot me, but...
Okay, where you need EMS?
Well, I mean, yes, I can't drive.
Okay.
Seeing, and I'm bleeding a lot.
Where part of your body?
I'm not sure. Somewhere on my head.
Okay, and what's your name? I'm still here. I'm still on the line with you. What's your name?
Alex Murdock.
Alex Murdock?
Yes, ma'am.
And you see you were driving, you got a flat tire, somebody stopped to help you and they shot you?
Well, they pulled over, yes, ma'am, like they were going to help me.
And can you give me a description of the person that shot you or shot at you?
Yes, ma'am. I mean, it was a white fella. I'd say
a white male.
A fair amount younger than me. Really, really short hair. You have an ambulance coming there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Stay on the line. I got them on the way.
He told the operator that he had gotten a flat tire, and when he stopped to change it, someone else drove by, got out and shot him in the head. He told the operator that he was okay, but he couldn't drive. He was rushed to the hospital where he made a full recovery, and then he told authorities that he had actually hired his drug dealer to shoot him so that Buster could get his $10 million life insurance. Authorities arrested Curtis Smith, Alec's drug dealer and distant cousin. Curtis told investigators that he had not shot Alec, but he had disposed of the weapon afterward. During an interview while out on bail, Curtis explained that Alec had called him out to where he was that day. Thinking he just needed help with his car, he went to meet him, but when he arrived, he was waving a gun around. He tried to get the gun away from Alec, but it went off, hitting Alec in the head. He said he then panicked, grabbed the gun, and left the area. He said he ended up throwing the gun away and admitted that it was stupid. Those details caused people to speculate that Alec was trying to set Curtis up to take the fall for Maggie and Paul's murders. People said they believed that Alec was going to claim that Curtis had attacked him and that he had to shoot and kill him in self-defense. He would likely claim that Curtis had confessed to murdering Maggie and Paul during the confrontation. When things didn't go according to plan, he made up the story about being shot by a stranger, and then, after having time to concoct a new story, he claimed it was an attempt to get Buster his life insurance. One detail that stands out about Alec's version is that he told the authorities that he wasn't sure if his insurance would pay out in the event of a death that was carried out himself. Now, as a skilled lawyer, it seems like he could very easily obtain that information. As a layman, I looked it up and understood easily that federal law requires life insurance to be paid out after having had the policy for 2 years for any reason, even death that is caused by someone on their own person. That makes it so somebody can't obtain a life insurance policy and immediately make it so their family can collect. But after 2 years, if you haven't had a history of attempts of those kind of acts that could cause death on your own person, your policy will pay out for any reason. An experienced lawyer should be able to easily gather that information without putting someone else at risk of being convicted of murder. It seemed like a stupid explanation. Alec was arrested and charged with insurance fraud, while Curtis was charged with assisting the death of someone's self and also insurance fraud. Both were released on bail. While out, Alec announced that he had left the law firm, that he was addicted to painkillers, and that he was going to rehab. Also at that time, the investigation into Gloria Satterfield's death, and more importantly, the insurance payout that was supposed to go to her family, was picking up. The Satterfields had been raising alarms about what they believed was a $505,000 payout from the Murdaugh's insurance policy. Upon investigating the case, they learned that that amount was only the first payment and that the insurance had paid an additional $3.8 million, all of which went to Alec. 2 felony fraud charges were added to Alec Murdaugh's case, and the judge ordered him to be held without bail. Over the next few months, Alec was indicted for more financial crimes, bringing his total to 75 cases, adding up to almost $9 million. At that point, Alec was sitting in jail, already having been charged with multiple crimes, but investigators were still gathering information about the murders of Maggie and Paul. They learned that Maggie wasn't happy in the relationship and had even seen a divorce lawyer. They speculated that she may have looked into their finances in preparation of the divorce and realized there was some illegal activity going on. On top of that, Mallory Beach's family was suing the Murdaughs in civil court for wrongful death. A hearing was coming up in that case where Alec was going to have to reveal his finances, which would uncover his years of fraud. Investigators also found that Alec had actually texted Maggie earlier on the day of the shooting and asked her to meet him at the lodge. He wanted her to go with him to visit his ailing parents. While she was on her way to the property, Maggie texted a friend and claimed that Alec sounded fishy and she thought he was up to something. Throughout the investigation, all of the information had come back showing that Alec Murdaugh had shot his wife and son with 2 different weapons. On July 14, 2022, Alec was indicted on 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possessing a weapon during the commission of a violent crime. Alec pleaded not guilty. At the trial, the prosecutor told the jury what they believed happened on the evening of June 7, 2021. While Alec, Maggie, and Paul were at the hunting lodge, Alec used a shotgun to shoot Paul in the chest and then in the head. Then he grabbed a .300 Blackout AR-style rifle and shot Maggie just feet away. 2 shots to her abdomen and her leg, then 2 shots to the head. Neither Paul or Maggie had any defensive wounds because they likely didn't see their killer as a threat, despite being shot at close range. The shell casings that were found around Maggie's body were matched to shell casings found near the house where Paul and a friend had been firing one of 3 .300 Blackout rifles that the Murdaughs had owned. They had been firing that rifle just 2 weeks before the murders. After the murders, Alex raced to his mother's house and arrived just after 9 p.m. His mother's caretaker said that it was unusual for Alec to arrive that late and he seemed fidgety. She said he stayed for 15 to 20 minutes. She also testified that Alec had later asked her to tell authorities that he had stayed for 30 to 40 minutes if she was ever questioned. A few days after that, Alec showed up at his mother's house with something blue balled up and took it upstairs. When investigators learned of that, they searched the house and found an extra-large blue rain jacket that tested positive for high levels of gunshot residue. Alec's defense was based on the fact that there was a video from earlier that day where Alec and Paul were riding around the property looking at trees that had been recently planted. Alec's lawyer claimed that if he was guilty, that meant he had killed his son an hour after having that bonding experience, and that seemed not believable. So the reasonable doubt they're claiming is that someone couldn't have killed someone else after looking at trees with them. Then, after describing Maggie's injuries, they claimed that Alec was innocent because he had no reason for killing his family. Except he did. Maggie was divorcing him and Paul was being sued for the boat accident. He had been stealing from his clients, and both Maggie and Paul were opening up issues that would get him caught. It's a very common reason for someone to commit murder, even their own family, especially by someone who has a history of believing they're untouchable. The first witness called to the stand was Sergeant Daniel Green of the Colleton County Sheriff's Office, who had been first on the scene. He described that Alec began immediately telling him that Paul had caused a boat accident 2.5 years prior, and he had gotten threats and that the murder was retaliation. His wife and son are dead, and that's the first thing on his mind. Friends testified that, because of the murders, people were afraid that a killer was out there and someone else could be hurt. Except for Alec. A witness testified that Alec never seemed concerned with the killers still being at large, and he didn't really ever talk about them being caught. Alec's defense relied mainly on his story of not being at the property during the time of the murders. Because of that, an investigator testified with a full timeline of movements from everyone involved. Cell phone calls and text messages from Alec, Paul, and Maggie's phones for the entire day had been analyzed and their movements were mapped. Some of the data extracted from the phone showed where Alec and Paul had gone around the property, surveying the trees that had recently been planted. That happened between 7:30 and 8 p.m. Of course, there was also the Snapchat video that had been taken at 8:44 p.m.
Hey, he's got a bird in his mouth! Bubba.
Hey, Bubba.
It's a guinea.
This is a chicken.
Come here, Bubba.
Come here, Cash.
Come here, Bubba.
Cash. Quit.
Now remember, Alec claimed that he had taken his father to the hospital and then went back to the lodge where he took a nap. When he woke up, he didn't see Maggie or Paul, so he went by himself to visit his mother. Now, the medical examiner had put Maggie and Paul's time of death at 9 p.m., so he was with them within 16 minutes of them being shot. So he couldn't have been napping and then woke up without seeing them. That was a lie. And it was more than likely that the mother and son were shot up to 10 minutes before 9 p.m. because both of their phones locked at 8:49 p.m. and were never unlocked by them again. Despite them both having text messages coming in, they never unlocked their phones to respond. Cell phone records show that Alec called Maggie's phone 3 times over the next few minutes despite still being on the property. The cell phone data, as well as data recovered from his vehicle, shows that Alec didn't leave the property until 9:07 p.m. He then flew to his mother's house, traveling at up to 74 miles per hour, or almost 120 kilometers an hour. During the drive, he texted Maggie, quote, "Going to check on M, be right back." He arrived at his mother's house at 9:22 and left at 9:43. He traveled back to the lodge, reaching up to 80 miles an hour, or almost 130 kilometers an hour. He got back to the lodge at 10:05 p.m. and called 911 at 10:07. Based on his locations, there was very little doubt that Alec had killed Maggie and Paul. Adding to the fact that he had lied through his teeth about where he had been that evening, any minimal amount of doubt was thoroughly washed away. Cell records also showed that there were communications between Alec and his family members that were not in his phone, but were listed in the cell phone records obtained from Verizon. That makes it seem like he might have deleted some of those communications directly from his phone, not realizing that they would still be in his call records at the cell company. Of course, like all narcissists who think they can talk their way out of a murder conviction, Alex took the stand. During his testimony, he denied being involved in the deaths of his wife or his son, but he did admit to lying about not being at the kennel.
Mr. Murdock, is that you? On the kennel video at 8:44 p.m. on June 7th, the night Maggie and Paul were murdered.
It is.
Were you in fact at the kennels at 8:44 p.m. on the night Maggie and Paul were murdered?
I was.
Did you lie to Sled Agent Owen and Deputy Laura Rutland on the night of June 7th and told them that you stayed at the house after dinner?
I did lie to them.
Did you lie to Agent Owen and Agent Croft on the follow-up interview on June 10th that the last time you saw Maggie and Paul was at dinner?
I did lie to them.
And in the interview of August 11th, did you tell Agent Owen and Agent Croft, did you lie to them by telling them that you were not down at the kennels on that night?
Yes.
Alec, why did you lie to Agent Owen, Agent Croft, and Deputy Rutland about the last time you saw Maggie and Paul?
As my addiction evolved over time, I would get in these situations or circumstances where I would get paranoid thinking. It could be anything that triggered it. It might be a look somebody gave me. It might be a reaction somebody had to something I did. It might be a policeman following me in a car. That night, June 7th, after finding Mags and Paul, don't talk to anybody without Danny with you. All my partners were just repeatedly telling me that. I had a deputy sheriff taking gunshot tests from my hands. I'm sitting in a police car with David Owen asking me about my relationship with my wife and my son. And all those things coupled together after finding them, coupled with my distrust for SLED, caused me to have paranoid thoughts. Normally, when these paranoid thoughts would hit me, I could take a deep breath real quick, and just think about it, reason my way through it, and just get past it really quickly. On June the 7th, I wasn't thinking clearly. I don't think I was capable of reason. And I lied about being down there. And I'm so sorry that I did.
After denying murdering his wife and son, the very next thing the defense did was bring up Alec's lies. They wanted to get out ahead of it and create some sort of reasonable explanation for why he lied, but they failed miserably. Alec had no reason to lie. He claims the drugs made him paranoid and that he didn't trust SLED, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, but that reason is complete bullshit. Alec had planned the murders and thought he could make himself seem like he was not near the property at the time. He raced to his mother's house so he would be seen there and then raced back, and he continued lying about it.
Did you continue lying after that night, did you not?
But once I lied, I continued to lie, yes, sir.
Why?
You know, oh, what a tangled web we weave. But once I told the lie, I told my family, I had to keep lying.
Because he's a habitual liar. He didn't lie in his past because he was paranoid. He lied in his past because he was a criminal. He was stealing money from his law firm and his clients. He had a history of lying in order to get away with criminal activity, and this was no different. During the cross-examination, the prosecutor asked Alec this.
Let me ask you this, were the dogs barking and carrying on or going out into the woods or acting like they sensed somebody was around that they didn't know?
Were the dogs acting like there was somebody around that they didn't know?
Yeah, like dogs do.
No.
They weren't.
There was nobody around that the dogs didn't know.
Okay. Dogs didn't, to your indication, sense anything out of the ordinary. They were just chasing after the guinea.
There was nobody else around.
All right, good.
For them to sense.
For an experienced lawyer, Alec doesn't seem too savvy about what the prosecutor is asking. Based on the timeline that was put together, which Alec was very aware of, Maggie and Paul were killed within minutes of when Alec was there at the kennel. So if he didn't kill them, somebody else would have had to be close by. He could have said, quote, "They were barking, I don't know what they were barking about." You know, at least leaving it open to be a possibility. Hell, he could have simply said, "I don't know." Instead, he was dead set that there was nobody else around at the time, making himself seem that much more guilty. The prosecutor refuted claims that there were two shooters, saying that it would have been no problem for Alec to have used both weapons, and he likely did it intentionally to throw suspicion off of himself and onto the theory that it was revenge for the death of Mallory Beach. The prosecutor explained that there was more than enough time for Alec to clean up and change his clothes. During his closing arguments, he said that there was no other person who could have committed the crime. Because of those details, Alec Murdock was found guilty of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of possession of a weapon during a violent crime. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. On November 29, 2023, Alec Murdock was sentenced to 27 years in prison for his financial fraud charges. On April 1, 2024, he was sentenced in federal court to 40 years in prison for the federal charges regarding his financial fraud cases. Alec eventually admitted to having lied about the circumstances of Gloria's fall. He didn't admit to anybody having killed her, but he did admit that the dogs were not involved in the fall. He had made that up in order to be able to file a claim against his homeowner's insurance, money he eventually kept from Gloria's family. He also lied and said she wasn't working at the time of her fall, so he wouldn't have to go through workers' compensation insurance. Alec Murdock is a habitual liar who thought he was above the law. When the law caught up to his crimes, instead of answering for them like a normal member of society, he murdered his wife and son in an effort to continue his life of crime. People make mistakes, and they lie to keep people from discovering them. It happens, and it doesn't mean a person is beyond redemption. But when they make the choice to gun down their wife and son in cold blood because they think they're above the law, that means they're a monster and should remain in a cage forever. If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave us a comment. You can check out our other show, Somewhere Sinister, on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.